That of the Sprouts of Famine is a cult devoted to Nurgle, made up of derelicts, degenerates, and renegade Astartes. They are guided by cabals of sorcerers and alchemists, who in turn maneuver the Warband's forces to various objectives under the command of the Great Unclean One, commonly known to the Imperium as Famine. This demon occupies and governs a decrepit asteroid, working as the base of operations for the Renegades, which is colloquially kept distinct from its lord using the demon's name in High Gothic, Fames. Into the maelstrom Fames lies, and there it wanders, sluggishly driven around by the flows and currents of the warp. The occasional incursion into real space by the whole complex is somewhat rare, given the peculiar nature of its main occupant, who usually prefers never getting too far from the Immaterium, while leaving his disciples free to spread famines and contagion throughout the galaxy. Such a decision is not rooted in the sloth, but rather it is simply born out of the demon's good heart. Even the most fervent of his subjects wouldn't gather any prestige if robbed of the chance to demonstrate his or her faith on the field. The Great Unclean One is already a favorite agent of Nurgle's will, and exactly for that reason he'd rather leave the chance to prove their worth to those who follow him. What Famine calls the good fight boils down to granting the mortals of the galaxy means of sustenance. As long as such objective is met, he sees no problem in being the éminence grise, or greenish in its particular case, and leaving others the glory and spoils they can gain in combat. Should any cell of the Sprouts of Famine found itself in grave danger or difficulty though, its generous and friendly patron would never abandon it to its fate. That he rarely takes to the battlefield himself can be seen as proof of the general competence of his underlings, or at the very least of the capacity of not finding themselves in too dire of a situation often enough to justify the demon presence. Time flows strangely in the Immaterium, and none can tell for how long Famine and its followers lingered on the asteroid Fames. As a result, it is difficult to point out a precise date for the founding of the Sprouts of Famine. The younger recruits, cultists, and deranged fodder are obviously too inaccurate of a way to offer serious estimates. The most veteran soldiers at their disposal, those Astartes sorcerers and apostles who rise to position of power, are so saturated with chaos energy that it is almost impossible to estimate their age. Their weapons and armor also vary greatly, spanning from pre-heresy age to Plague Wars era patterns, and almost everything in between. Sightings and reported offensives that match their modus operandi, though, began in late M34. It is also known that those first offensives were carried out almost exclusively by Astartes contingents, occasionally supported by demon hosts. It is therefore reasonable to assume that the presence of cultists came in a second phase as a result of the growing reputation of the Warband. The only oath of loyalty the Sprouts recognize and value is that bonding them to the demon after whom they are named, and through him to Grandfather Nurgle. For the same reason, they are rarely seen cooperating with other renegades or heretics, probably because of their modus operandi and their objectives. The Sprouts of Famine have shown limited interest for military objectives, and their incursions into real space hit from one end of the galaxy to the other, without any wish to actively maim the enemy war machine. The declared intent is, on the contrary, to just assault and disable any target's defenses. Once such goals have been achieved, it is tradition for the Sprouts to begin a ritual spanning 49 days, whose power is that of drawing in literal famine, gather whatever necessary, being it resources or promising individuals, and abandon the position to its fate. Such endeavor is not out of spite, a cruelty wishing only to starve out the world they invade, because once their morbid incantation has been completed, new and plentiful food sources become available. Where the fields are withered and the cattle is long dead due to the toxins Nurgle's followers inevitably carry within themselves, new fruit plants grow their way out of the rotten stems and the decaying carcasses, nourished by corruption and ready to nourish the starving masses in turn by the grace of the Lord of Entropy. The voice of the forlorn and the starving determine the destination of the Sprouts of Famine. Prayers and hopes of those who are hungry all reach the decrepit Fames through the void between worlds and the currents of the Immaterium, and come to the ears of the Great Unclean One, inhabiting and administering it. He is unable to resist his own compassion, and not be moved by those heartfelt desires. Infinitely pious, just like any individual of his stature should be, Famine doesn't lose an instant and sends his followers through the stars to assist those in need, and in doing so, expands Grandfather Nurgle's influence in real space. With the 41st millennium nearing its conclusion, the fall of Cadia due to the 13th Black Crusade, and the Plague Wars initiated by fallen Primarch Mortarion, the demon called Famine has been called to serve and fight at his side. As compensation for its assistance, the Great Unclean One formally requested Mortarion to grant its protégés new resources and equipment in order to help them face the dark times of the future. Bound by its covenant to the Primarch to move under his command, their patron hasn't abandoned the Sprouts to their fate. It is bound to them too, by sincere affection rather than formal contract. To mitigate its absence, a group of sorcerers and high-ranking apostles has stepped in its stead for the time Famine would be busy elsewhere. The main call of such a coven is listening to the plight of those reduced to hunger by the most recent spiral of conflict, and make sure their prayers are granted and their wishes fulfilled. The most exalted of the bureaucrats of hunger, as they are informally known, is a demon prince, the favored disciple of the absent Great Unclean One, a creature called Enrolok. Not even among the Sprouts of Famine Enrolok's background is fully known. He usually keeps to himself, guiding the warband on the battlefield and during farmers drifting through the Immaterium with resolve unparalleled by any other member of the warband, save maybe Famine itself. The Demon Prince's past is fully understood only by the Great Unclean One. He was once a common mortal, that much everyone knows, but only he, Famine, and a few of the bureaucrats are privy to the circumstances of his ascension and the origins of the Sprouts. In the distant past, millennia before the Plague Wars, the Black Crusades, and some say even the original Great Crusade, he was but a poor and humble man, blessed or cursed with the powers of a psyker. Untrained and starving on a desolate planet, he sought to escape the reality of malnourishment and feebleness and looked for sanctuary in his dreams. It was during one such dream quest that he stumbled upon the Wells of Souls, the Immaterium populated by the Netherborn. He found a kindred spirit residing in such depths, Famine. Such creature showed sympathy to the dreaming man, offering help and guidance, and taught him to sustain his physical form with the energies of the warp. In time, the human who would become Enrolok starts spending more and more time dreaming the Immaterium and allowing its energies to permeate his form while he visited his soon-to-be friend on the other side. Time came, however, for the two of them to meet in the flesh. The Great Unclean One instructed the man, no longer starving, to perform rituals to weaken the barrier between real space and the Immaterium, and so he did. When the veil was torn, hordes of demons came forth, Famine at their head, to grant wrathful gifts of entropy and decay to those who mistreated its mortal friend. The whole planet was engulfed in the corrupting influence of chaos, and the majority of its mass forcefully dragged into the warp. Enrolok ascended that very day, officially joining the vast host of the followers of Nurgle under the patronage of Famine. The seeds of what would become the Sprouts of Famine were also secured the day Enrolok ascended through the few of his compatriots that survived the transition into warp space. Those sorry souls were guided by the newly born Demon Prince into the cult of the Great Unclean One, and through it, Grandfather Nurgle. In time, they gathered new followers from the most various of sources. Renegade Astartes, cultist cells, mutants, all were welcomed, just like Enrolok himself was. Such is the way Famine dictated.